Hey team, welcome back to another pod. I am not going to lie to you guys, I'm going to be very honest this episode that I've really just been feeling like I'm in quite a funk. And so that's my topic for today is how do you work through a funk? Why do you feel a funk and how do you work through a funk? So if you don't understand when I'm saying funk, I mean like just in like a funky space, just like not really feeling the best. I'm just kind of going through like a little bit of a low, I guess. I don't know, just like a space where I'm feeling not myself is what I would define it as. I wouldn't want to say it as a low because I don't feel like I'm feeling like super bad. I'm just like, not myself. So I don't know if it's like the new year or something that's like making me feel a bit blue. But I want to talk about it and kind of just like feel like using this session as therapy, talking to you guys will be helpful, but also just also looking forward into, why am I feeling this way? But what can I do to help myself get through a funk? Because I've been internalizing and thinking about this a lot. I think I've also been thinking about like already been taking action and thinking about like how can I move forward and like move out of this funk. And then already been taking action like on those things. Still in it, just not like fully out of it. And so I feel my current funk is that I'm feeling like a bit deflated, unmotivated, and unsure of myself. And I think it's kind of like, I think it's maybe it's because of the new year. I'm kind of reflecting like, am I doing like what I want? Am I who I want to be? Am I like serving my personal like feeling of what my vision and purpose is? And I think the answer in short is no to that question. And I think when you answer no to it, then you kind of start to feel like, oh, then what? Like, what is this all for? And what am I doing wrong? And so I think it because I feel like, because I know that the current state of where I am is not where I want to be. How I'd phrase it is the reason that I give a no to my current state actually is because it's not where I want to be when I look in the long term. So if I look 5 years down the road and my goals, I'm not currently where I want to be, which is kind of like, when I verbalize it, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, well, if you want to be there in 5 years, why would you be there in that position now? Right? Why would that be a 5-year goal? Which, just this is why you speak things out loud because it helps you realize maybe you're being like a bit irrational about things or you're not thinking about it. So I think for me, when I think about it, I'm like, I actually really love my job and my life that I have right now. And yeah, I'm ambitious and I know where I want to kind of be in 3 to 5 years. I have a vision of that and I'm not there right now. But that doesn't mean that I need to be feeling funky about that. So I think that's like a first point is kind of actually when you're feeling funky, I think a really good first place to start is talking to somebody and voicing how you're feeling. Sometimes I avoid voicing how I feel because I do, like, especially when I'm having like thoughts that are not my normal self, because I do feel like, oh, once you voice it, then it becomes a reality. But actually, and I think I've had that thought and like view for quite a few years. But now that I think about it, I think there have been times where I haven't voiced something and it's definitely not been for the better. I feel like I've internalized it, pushed it away, and then like acted out on those feelings, but never really voiced maybe to other people or to myself why. And then it may not have ended up being like the best delivery or decision or way of going about it. So I do think voicing it allows you to like rationalize how you feel and really like realize what you're saying. Because I think when you speak words into existence, you realize like, oh, you really actually listen. Because I feel like it even happens with work, like when you're doing a piece of work and then you like read out what you've written. When you actually read it out to somebody else and you're like, oh, makes no sense, or I made all these errors here, or like, oh, that sounds amazing. Like you have those realizations. But I think if you just internalize it, you write it down, you don't read it out, you don't reflect on it, then you definitely don't allow yourself to listen to what you're thinking or feeling. That's how I feel anyway. And so for me, I found it really helpful to vocalize how I'm feeling And not with the intention of like wanting anything to come of it. You know, like you don't say things like to somebody with the hope that they resolve your problems for you or like give you good advice. Like sometimes I just say it because it just feels good to have it out there. So I think being able to have people in your life that you can do that to, and you're like, hey, I just been feeling this way, but I don't need you to fix it. And I think on the receiving end of that, I think a good point of advice is just like being able to like listen and receive, but not have to feel like you need to give out. Because I think for me, I can sometimes be a bit of like a jump to the solution, want to fix like how someone feels. But then I think I have to constantly remind myself, oh, like they're just venting to me or they're just expressing how they feel. They don't necessarily want a response on like advice. And if they did want advice, I'm sure maybe they'd ask like, oh, what do you think? And I think that's like a good reminder for like if you're on the receiving end. Don't be someone's punching bag, but I think there's times to listen, there's times to like offer advice, and I think you can just directly ask that person as well. So yeah, I think my first call out is that for my funk so far, like one of the things I've actioned is just like voicing it. And I think in a way for me, it's made me feel like it's not as big of a deal because um it's just how you're feeling in that current moment. And it allows you to be like, oh, it's how I'm feeling at the current moment, but it's not a forever feeling. Um, so I think by voicing it, I was able to realize maybe you're not really like living in the present and like you're not reflecting in the present, you're reflecting in the future. So what I mean by that is like when I say like, oh, I have a vision of where I want to be in 3 to 5 years, that's great. That's your future. But if you're reflecting on like that vision, but you're not where you are, but you're like reflecting on your current state as your like comparison, then that's not fair in yourself because that's unrealistic, right? And if I'm gonna expect like myself to be at XYZ in 5 years, then I should just expect it of myself now instead of in 5 years, if you know what I mean. So it allowed me to think about it and just think about, okay, just try to be a little bit more like rational and not be too emotional. But then I kind of dug deeper and I thought about, okay, like why am I feeling these kind of irrational thoughts or like what is kind of triggering that? And I think a big thing for me is impatience. If anyone knows me well, they know I'm like relatively impatient. I feel like I'm very, as a person, like proactive, productive, probably put too much of an emphasis sometimes on like action and productivity based exercises or like just like actions. I think I'm very action oriented and it can sometimes be like quite a negative thing for myself because, you know, enjoying a Sunday at home can sometimes be ruined by me having this like crippling sense of like this crippling need to like have to go and do something because I haven't taken actions that are like physically productive. So I think for me, I definitely battle with this like ongoing feeling of impatience with myself and sometimes with those around me. I think I can be a bit impatient to some people sometimes. But I think having impatience with myself is probably a common theme. And that's when I probably get down on myself is when I'm like, oh, what is it? Like, why are you not at XYZ point already? Like, I don't get it. Like, what are you? And then I start to think like, oh, like I'm being impatient. Then I start to get down on myself of like, oh, you're not doing enough. And then it's just like downward spiral into feeling crappy about myself. So I think that's one big call out to make and reflection that I have myself is just like checking like how much you're leaning into like I guess first you check like, oh, are you being really like where is this? Are you really being realistic and rational with your feelings right now? And then like what is triggering you to feel that way? So for me, I feel like it was definitely my impatient side coming through more and me leaning into that more, which can be great sometimes, like the impatience, but I think you have to check like whether that is serving you in the moment. And I don't personally think it is serving me in the moment. I think it can has a tendency to make me be really hard on myself. And then like I think by nature I've usually like then thrown myself into like being hyper productive, which is not a good approach either. So this time, I think this time I'm trying to be more measured and considered in my approach that isn't serving my impatient side. I think traditionally I've gone head first into something and like kept myself really busy, and that's been my answer to like managing when I feel like I'm not myself or I'm like not feeling so inspired. And so I think for me it's realizing that it's listening to my internal voice that is like things take time, because there's like two sides of me. One side of me is like, girl, hurry up and do your things, like you're just blocking yourself. And the other side is like, okay, no, take your time, like good things take time. What's your rush? It's not like you're not doing anything. So I think like one side of me has like is easier on myself and like has more empathy, and the other side is just like being a hard ass. So this year I'm trying to lean more into the like a middle ground. I think it's like having empathy for myself, but like, you know, being my hard ass self where necessary. But what I would say is I think during this funk for myself, I feel myself listening to myself and understanding that I don't think the right thing to do in this time is to like be my old self and get out there and just like be super busy. I actually think right now it's to listen to what are my interests, do a very detailed review of like, what is it that I want to go into? What is it that I want to explore more? And do like a very detailed discovery, because I think that's what I really need right now, is just like a better understanding of why I want to do something and how, before I like throw myself into it. Yeah. So I think another space that I really like to lean into is my values. And I've spoken about this in another podcast, but I do really think like, you know, regrounding to what your values are as a person and calling on different values in a time where you're not really like feeling the best is super important. And I also think like sitting down and thinking about like what your vision is, and really understanding to think about what can I remove, and assessing like if, you know, is my life already going in the way that like, am I taking the right steps to get to where I want to for my vision? I think reviewing that is really important. If it's a yes, and it's a reminder to be patient and keep doing the hard yards and just keep being consistent. And if it's a no, then it's a time to think, okay, rethink what can be removed from my current habits or my current routine. What do I need to change? You know, what do I need to bring into my life? And I wanted to, I saw this really awesome quote the other day. I don't know why, like I'm not usually that big of a quote person. Like I enjoy reading some when I see it. But I saw this one that was on someone, I think, posted it on LinkedIn, of all places. But this is the quote. It was, growth is painful, change is painful, but there's nothing as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. And I really like that, because I feel that this is a really good reminder to really review and check like where you are at. And, you know, I think there are times where you should be consistent and keep going on with your normal habits, you know, and like a long-term goal that you have. But there's sometimes an opportunity to review and think like, is this really getting me to where I want to be? Is this actually making me like, is this building towards the future that I want? And is this also like making me happy? And if it's not, then it's like a opportunity to have a hard conversation with yourself as to whether like that is worth continuing. Because I think the last part of that quote really sticks with me, is like, there's nothing worse than, there's nothing as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. And I think that the word belong is like, you know, is it something that is really for you? Is it really serving you? Do you really need to be doing what you're doing? And I think that's a really good opportunity to reflect in that space. Kind of branching off visions, I think also is habits. So I think another place to start as well is checking your habits, and whether they're healthy for you and your mindset and allowing you to be in a good place to kind of face the world every day. There was another great quote. Sorry to like bring so many quotes up this week. Maybe it's because I'm feeling like funky that I'm more receptive and sensitive towards these quotes. But there was an awesome quote that I read, and it was saying that the words we speak become the house we live in. I love this quote, and it just resonated so strongly with me, I think, and my personal beliefs and values. I just feel like I always harp on about this of like, like the words that you put out into the world, what you tell yourself every day is really what you believe. And like some people just think like, oh, and I'm just saying it because that's how I feel. Totally agree. There are times and places where like what you're just saying is just how you feel. But then this comes back to my podcast I did a few weeks ago, which is like, is it adding value? If those words that you're speaking really do become the house that you live in, if you're every day telling yourself like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not working hard enough, I don't like the way I look, my hair's not nice, and you just continue to tell yourself all these statements that you may or may not truly believe, you begin to like believe in that and see that, because how can you not, I guess, believe in what you're saying every day? Because that just becomes like your narrative. So I do think that there is a very unconscious use of words that don't empower us as humans to really like live to our full potential. So I do think that it's really important to check your habits, like how you speak to yourself, like how you speak to others. Or it could be, checking your habits such as like, are you waking up and just staring at your phone all morning? Are you going to the toilet and on your phone all the time? Like, does that then turn into like a 30-minute toilet session when it really takes like 2 minutes? I think checking your habits is like super important, because you're able to reflect as to whether what you're doing is actually building towards your vision and values as a person. Okay. For me, I think like just speaking on this topic, I think right now during my funk, I feel like I've been drawn more towards like defaulting to on my phone, being on my phone, or like, looking at my phone and random crappy stuff as an outlet. And I'm very like conscious of this, and I'm trying to make small changes of not doing that. So like I re-downloaded like the news app, and I'm reading like news from BBC, trying to like take my mind elsewhere. But I think for me, like, yeah, it is nice to read about the news, but also it's totally not nice because a lot of the content that's on there is like pretty doom and gloom. So I think it's just like finding different avenues where you can learn and get a different perspective. I think for me, in times when I'm feeling like funky, I do like to kind of reach out to different streams of information or learning, which allows me to learn and get a new perspective on something. And I think like this comes back to podcasts that I did earlier around like I had friends who, they brought up tarot cards, and they would like pick out cards to kind of offer themselves a different perspective on the current state of how they're feeling. And I think doing things like that is super amazing for helping you to essentially like shake yourself out of your current mindset or your way of thinking. And I do think a funk like fundamentally probably comes from you convincing yourself and telling yourself so much that you believe like that is your only option in an environment where you kind of feel a bit stuck. At least for me, I just feel like my funk comes from when I'm maybe not surrounding myself with the best information or like habits, and then I start to like I'm aware of it, and then I start to feel like, oh, this is not me, this is not who I am, I don't feel like I'm growing, and then I kind of feel like stuck. Mind you, I do think a funk is like a good place to be in sometimes. I don't think it's negative. I think that it's good to be able to be in a funk and reflect and move forward. And even recognizing that you are in a funk is a great level of self-awareness. But managing on how you like move out of that and move forward is, I think, a key player in like the land of the funk. Two other things that I really like to do when I am feeling funky is one, exercise. If you guys don't know already, I love exercise. I love working out. I don't want to be cliche, but I just enjoy it. It just gives me like it's a place for me to meditate, have my own space to myself, really work on myself. So I like to go and exercise, try a different class, try a different like outdoor activity, a different sport, just try new things. I think that's an area that I really like am open to exploring new things without feeling the need to like be consistent on them. And then the second thing is connect. So I do like to strike up different conversations when I'm feeling in a funk and just kind of say yes to a few more things that would usually make me uncomfortable or socialize with a different crowd. I think being able to have meaningful connection, it really refreshes like your mindset and perspective. And it just reminds you to like think a different way. So yeah, that's my other two things. I think the last one I would say is just I had this on a post note, like a sticky note stuck onto my laptop, but it just says take a deep breath. I think for me, I have to often remind myself to take a deep breath. I think I can just be so like tunnel vision sometimes and just like driving towards like productivity, like achieving things, pressure to be successful, getting stuff done. But, life's not all about ticking boxes and like getting stuff done. It's actually about living, right? So I think it's a reminder for me to just take a deep breath, look at the environment around me, appreciate those people in my life, be curious about new things, and really take that step forward into living into my values. Yeah, I just think taking a deep breath is super important for everything. It just can help you give you that time to like think before you react, think before you do silly things. Just make sure you take a deep breath, guys. Anyway, I personally really loved this podcast because I feel like it was really great to talk. And as I said at the start, like I think when you voice things, it's really helpful for yourself and reflecting and reviewing where you're at. But I also love this podcast because I hope that you guys can gain something out of it. I think, we all go through funks at different times. And it's not always easy. But I think a thing to remind yourself is that like I think everybody goes through having funks. They just do it in different ways, different capacity. But I think being open to your friends, families, randoms, just like speaking to you and being vulnerable about their funk is beautiful. And I think it's something that you should just be mindful of if someone does approach you, just to be receptive and just listen. You don't have to fix their problems, you just have to listen. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I will speak to you next week.